Sometimes the greatest treachery hides where you seek salvation. Charlotte and I had lived together for almost 4 years, though we never officially got married. For me, it didn't matter. I considered her my wife, and that was more important than any stamp in a passport. I'm David, and I worked as a production line operator at an auto parts factory in Dallas. The work was monotonous but stable, with decent pay that was enough for an apartment in a good neighborhood and a normal life. Charlotte waited tables at one of the trendy restaurants downtown, often coming home late in the evening. That January evening when it all began, snow swirled outside the window, a rarity for Dallas. I was lying on the couch, scrolling through the news feed on my phone, when Charlotte entered the living room with a strange expression on her face. She sat down next to me, and I immediately felt the tension radiating from her body. "David, we need to talk," she said quietly. My heart sank. Those words never heralded anything good. I put down my phone and turned to face her, trying to read what was behind her nervous gaze. "I want to try something new," she continued, fidgeting with her hands. "For us. For our relationship." "What exactly?" I asked cautiously, studying her face for clues. "SBA treatments. Couples massages, relaxation. They say it really brings couples closer together. I have discount coupons from the restaurant. Clients often leave those instead of tips." I wasn't a big fan of such things, but I didn't want to refuse. Charlotte had seemed tired and irritable lately. Maybe we really did need some stress relief. The factory work had been particularly demanding that month, with overtime shifts that left me exhausted. Perhaps some relaxation would do us both good. "Okay, why not?" I agreed, trying to sound enthusiastic. The following week, we drove to that SBA complex on the outskirts of Dallas. The place looked respectable. Marble floors, quiet music, the scent of essential oils permeating the air. Charlotte seemed excited, almost too much so. She constantly checked her phone while we waited in the lobby, her fingers dancing across the screen with an urgency that seemed odd for someone about to relax. The treatments were pleasant enough. The massage therapist worked out knots in my shoulders I didn't even know I had. The warm stones, the dim lighting, the soothing sounds, it all should have been perfect. But I noticed how Charlotte kept excusing herself to use the restroom, each time taking her phone with her. When we were getting ready to leave, she suggested we come back the following week, and then the week after that. I agreed, even though my work schedule didn't really allow for it. The third time, I caught a cold and said we should better postpone the visit. Charlotte's face fell in a way that seemed disproportionate to the situation. "Maybe you could go by yourself?" I suggested, my voice hoarse from the cold. "You still have that coupon. Relax after a hard week." She visibly tensed, her jaw tightening, but then agreed. That evening she returned home later than usual, far too energetic for someone after a relaxing massage. Her eyes were bright, her movements quick and animated. Something about it didn't sit right with me, but I pushed the feeling aside, attributing it to my cold-induced paranoia. Something gnawed at me, wouldn't let me rest. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was the small details that were adding up to form a picture I didn't want to see. The next day, when Charlotte was at work, I decided to check her old tablet, which she'd stopped using after buying a new phone. We shared passwords. There had never been secrets between us, or so I thought. That openness now felt like a cruel irony. I opened the Messenger app and saw that many messages had been deleted, but cloud synchronization was still working. Through the account on my computer, I was able to recover some of the correspondence. What I read turned my world upside down. "Philip, I can't do this anymore. David almost caught us last time. Charlotte, calm down. We're being careful. He doesn't suspect anything. You promised we'd be together. When will that finally happen?" "Soon, darling. I need time to arrange everything." The messages dated back 3 months. I kept reading, feeling my blood run cold in my veins. Each message was another knife to the heart I thought was safely protected behind the walls of trust we'd built together. Philip, a chief financial officer at some corporation. They'd met at the restaurant where he was a regular customer. At first, just conversations, compliments, generous tips, then exchanging numbers, then meetings at that same SBA complex where I, like a fool, had driven her myself. My entire world shattered into pieces. The woman I shared my bed with, made plans with for the future, was betraying me with a wealthy client. And I, naive idiot, had been her chauffeur to these rendezvous. The irony was so bitter it made my stomach turn. I didn't make scenes, didn't yell or demand explanations. Instead, I began to act coldly and rationally. Years of working on the production line had taught me patience, precision, and the importance of following a plan step by step. Now I would apply those same principles to dismantling the lie my life had become. The next day, I went to the restaurant where Charlotte worked. Not to see her, but to talk to her colleagues. I introduced myself to Evelina, an experienced waitress who'd worked there for about 5 years. I presented myself as an old friend of Charlotte's and asked if she knew Philip, the same client who often left big tips. Evelina turned out to be talkative, eager to share workplace gossip. Yes, she knew Philip well. A wealthy man, married, 2 children. He came to the restaurant 2 or 3 times a week, always requested a table in Charlotte's section. Evelina even joked that Charlotte had charmed a rich client and should teach the other waitresses her secret. She's changed somehow lately, Evelina added thoughtfully, stirring sugar into her coffee. Become more secretive. We used to tell each other everything, but now she only talks about work. And she's been taking more evening shifts, always volunteering for the late ones. I thanked her and left, my mind racing. The picture was becoming clearer, but I needed more information. I needed to understand the full extent of what I was dealing with before I could plan my response. That evening, I pretended nothing was wrong. Charlotte came home from work, and we had dinner together as usual. She talked about some customers, complained about fatigue, mentioned her feet hurt from standing all day. I nodded, smiled, asked questions, played the role of the concerned partner. But inside, everything was boiling, churning with a mixture of rage, hurt, and cold calculation. How could you do this? After everything we'd been through together, after all the times I'd supported her, held her when she cried about her difficult past, helped her build confidence in herself, had any of it meant anything to her? I remember that Charlotte had been married before. That marriage lasted less than a year and ended in divorce. She'd said her first husband was a controlling freak, that they simply weren't right for each other, that he'd suffocated her with his jealousy and possessiveness. Now I wondered, maybe the problem had been with her all along. Maybe I'd been too trusting, too willing to believe her version of events. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and click like if you enjoy this story. I always read your comments and analyze which stories you like best so that I can create better stories. Thank you. I will continue the story. The next 2 weeks I play my role perfectly. Pretended to be the loving partner, the caring companion. Meanwhile, I methodically prepared for the separation. I consulted with a lawyer about dividing property. The apartment was mortgaged. We'd been making payments equally. Furniture, appliances, everything bought together. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed man named Oliver, laid out my options with clinical precision. But most importantly, I started moving money. I had savings, about $50,000 that I'd accumulated over years of overtime shifts and careful budgeting. Charlotte knew about them because we planned to someday buy a house, maybe start a family. I began gradually converting this money into bare securities. Untraceable, impossible to track. The lawyer had suggested this option, explaining the legal gray area that would protect my assets. Meanwhile, I continued monitoring Charlotte's correspondence. She'd become more careful, deleting messages immediately after reading them. But I'd found a way to recover them through backup copies. Technology had made cheating easier, but it had also made catching cheaters easier too. It turned out it wasn't just about love or passion. Philip promised Charlotte the beautiful life. He told her about his investments, about how he optimized the company's finances. Reading between the lines, I understood he was involved in something not entirely legal, some kind of tax schemes, moving money through offshore accounts. The details were murky, but the criminality was clear. And Charlotte knew. More than that, she was helping him. Philip sometimes gave her envelopes that she delivered to various locations around Dallas. She thought this was her ticket to a wealthy lifestyle, her escape from serving tables and dealing with difficult customers. She fantasized about designer clothes, luxury cars, exotic vacations, all the things my factory salary couldn't provide. Naive fool. Philip never intended to leave his wife. He was just using Charlotte, both as a mistress and as a courier for his dirty business. Men like him never left their comfortable marriages for the help. Charlotte was just another disposable asset in his portfolio. But I decided not to interfere with his schemes directly. I had a different plan, one that would hurt them both in ways they couldn't anticipate. Early February brought a new snowstorm, unusual for Dallas. The city wasn't equipped for such weather, and roads became treacherous. Charlotte said she was going to meet with girlfriends. I knew it was a lie. She was in a Philip to that same SBA complex where they usually met. The weather was terrible, but apparently her desire to see him outweighed concerns for safety. When she left, I acted quickly. I gathered her things, clothes, cosmetics, personal items. Not everything, just the essentials. I packed them into suitcases and drove them to a storage locker at the train station, my car slipping on the icy roads. The key to the locker I placed in an envelope, along with a brief note. Then I changed the locks on the apartment. Called a locksmith who did it in 2 hours, working quickly despite the weather. New keys, only for me. It was a bold move, potentially problematic legally, but Oliver had assured me that in Texas, with no formal marriage and my name on the lease, I had the right to control access to my residence. That evening, when Charlotte returned, she couldn't get inside. She rang the doorbell, pounded on the door, called me repeatedly. I didn't answer right away. I let her stand there in the cold hallway, let her experience a fraction of the isolation I'd been feeling for months. Finally, I opened the door. She stood on the landing, furious and frightened at the same time, snowflakes still melting in her hair. "What does this mean?" she demanded, her voice shrill. "Why did you change the locks?" "Come in," I said calmly, my voice steady and cold. "We really do need to talk." She entered, and I closed the door behind her. On the table lay a folder with printed messages, each page a testament to her betrayal. I'd organized them chronologically, highlighted the most damning passages. It was a prosecutorial display, and I was ready to present my case. "Sit down," I indicated the couch. Charlotte saw the folder, and her face went pale, all the blood draining away in an instant. Her hand flew to her mouth. "David, I can explain everything." "Quiet," I interrupted, my voice cutting like a blade. "Now I'm going to talk. You're going to listen." I told her everything I knew. About Philip, about their meetings, about the messages I'd recovered. About how she'd used me as cover for her affair. About how I'd felt these last weeks, living with someone who kissed me goodnight while planning to meet another man. I laid it all out methodically, watching her face crumble with each revelation. Charlotte cried, tried to justify herself. She said she loved me, that Philip meant nothing to her, that it was a mistake. The tears flowed freely, her mascara running in black streaks down her cheeks. But I'd seen enough tears in my life to know the difference between remorse and regret at being caught. "If you love me," I asked coldly, "then why did you cheat for 3 months? 3 months, Charlotte. 90 days of lying to my face. He manipulated me, promised to help with money, said you couldn't give me what I deserve." Her voice broke, pleading for understanding I no longer had to give. "And you believed him?" She fell silent, and that silence was the most honest answer she'd given all evening. I pulled out the envelope with the key to the storage locker. "Here's the key to your things. They're at the train station. Tomorrow my lawyer will contact you about dividing property. We'll settle everything in a civilized manner. "You can't just throw me out," she screamed, her voice rising to a pitch that would have alarmed the neighbors. "I paid for this apartment too, and you'll get your share," I replied evenly. "But you won't live here anymore. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Never." Charlotte sobbed, begged me to give her another chance. She fell to her knees, literally groveling, promising it would never happen again. But I was unmoved. Betrayal is a choice, not a mistake. She made that choice 3 times a week for 3 months. That wasn't an accident. That was a pattern, a lifestyle, a conscious decision to value her own desires over my dignity. Eventually she left, taking the envelope with shaking hands. I locked the door behind her and for the first time in weeks felt relief wash over me. The apartment suddenly seemed larger, cleaner, as if her presence had been suffocating me without my realizing it. But my revenge didn't end there. A few days later, I met with Victor, my old friend who worked as a journalist for a local newspaper. We'd known each other since high school, and I trusted him completely. I told him about Philip and his financial schemes. I didn't mention Charlotte, only facts about suspicious operations, offshore transfers, tax evasion strategies. I gave him enough to start digging. Victor was intrigued. He began investigating deeper, calling in favors from colleagues who specialized in financial crime reporting. It turned out that Philip had been on the IRS radar for a while, but they lacked concrete evidence. Victor's investigation might provide that missing link. Meanwhile, Charlotte tried to contact me. She sent messages, called constantly, even showed up at the factory during my lunch break. Security had to escort her off the property when she refused to leave. I ignored all her attempts. My lawyer handled all negotiations regarding the separation. She started living with Philip. As I'd suspected, he didn't refuse her shelter. His wife was away visiting family for a few weeks, giving him the perfect opportunity to play house with his mistress. Charlotte probably thought she'd won, that she traded up from a factory worker to a corporate executive. Her joy, however, was short-lived. A month later, Victor published an article about financial fraud at the company where Philip worked. The article was meticulously researched, every fact verified by the newspaper's legal team, every claim backed by documents. It didn't mention Philip by name initially, but anyone in Dallas's business community could connect the dots. The IRS reacted immediately. Audits were launched. Philip's computers were seized. His bank accounts were frozen pending investigation. The careful house of cards he'd built over years collapsed in a matter of days. Philip didn't go to trial immediately. He was smarter than I'd given him credit for, and had expensive lawyers who knew how to delay and deflect. But his reputation was destroyed. The board of directors of his company forced him to resign to pursue other opportunities, corporate speak for being fired in disgrace. His wife, upon returning home and learning about both the investigation and the affair, filed for divorce, taking half his remaining assets and primary custody of their children. And Charlotte? She ended up with nothing. Philip, having lost everything, blamed her for the information leak. He convinced himself that she'd been the one to talk to journalists, to betray his secrets. The irony was delicious. She who had betrayed me was now betrayed herself. He threw her out of his house, cut off all contact, even got a restraining order claiming she was harassing him. She tried to come back to me. She wrote long messages about how sorry she was, how blind she'd been, how I was the only one who truly cared about her. She showed up at my apartment building, waiting in the cold until I had no choice but to acknowledge her presence. But I was unmoved. I'd spent weeks hardening my heart, transforming pain into resolve. I answered her only once, my message brief and final. You made your choice. Now live with the consequences. The separation was finalized in early spring. We divided the property equally. I paid her out for her share of the apartment. She took half the furniture and appliances. Everything was legally clean, documented, notarized. Oliver had done excellent work ensuring there were no loose ends that could come back to haunt me. My savings, hidden in bare securities, remained untouched. Charlotte never knew about their existence. I'd hidden them just in time. That $50,000 would become the foundation of my new life, the seed money for the future I'd build without her. 2 months after the separation, I learned that Charlotte had returned to waitressing, but at a different restaurant across town. Philip had found new work in another state, trying to rebuild his career far from the scandal. They no longer communicated. Their grand romance, built on lies and greed, had lasted exactly as long as it took for consequences to arrive. One day I got a call from Eva, Evelina's friend from the restaurant. She asked if I'd like to meet for coffee. I agreed without great expectations, curious but cautious. Eva turned out to be smart and interesting. She knew about my situation from Evelina and was frank about it, which I appreciated. No games, no pretense. "I'm not looking for anything serious right now," she said, her honesty refreshing. "But I enjoy talking with you. Can we just see each other sometimes?" I agreed. It was easy, without obligations, without pressure. We met for coffee, went to movies, took walks in the park as winter gave way to spring. It was comfortable, uncomplicated. After months of Charlotte's drama, Eva's straightforwardness was like cool water after crossing a desert. And then something unexpected happened. 3 months after the separation, Charlotte contacted me again, but this time not with pleas to return. She wanted to apologize, genuinely, without manipulation, without asking for anything in return. We met at a neutral location, a small cafe on the outskirts of Dallas, far from anywhere either of us frequented. Charlotte looked different, not physically, but as if something inside her had changed. Her eyes held a clarity I hadn't seen before, a weariness that came from genuine self-reflection rather than self-pity. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said quietly, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup for warmth. "I just want you to know, I understand what I lost. You were the best thing I had, and I destroyed it through greed and stupidity." "Why did you cheat?" I asked, the question I'd been carrying for months. "Really, why?" She was silent for a long time, gathering her thoughts, staring into her coffee as if it held answers. "My first marriage fell apart because I felt caged. When I met you, you gave me freedom, but I interpreted it as indifference. Philip gave attention, compliments, promised me the stars. I believed I deserved more, that you were too simple for me, too ordinary. And now I understand that simplicity isn't a flaw. That reliability is worth more than beautiful promises. But I understand it too late." I nodded. Her words sounded sincere, but they no longer mattered. The person I'd been when we were together, the man who might have been moved by this confession, no longer existed. Charlotte's betrayal had killed him, and someone harder, more cautious had taken his place. "I can't forgive you," I said, the words coming easily. "Not now. Maybe never. But I accept your apology." We finished our coffee and parted ways. It was our last meeting, and we both knew it. There was no drama, no tears, just a quiet acknowledgement that this chapter was truly closed. Several more months passed. My relationship with Eva developed into something deeper. We weren't rushing, weren't making grand plans. We just existed together, supporting each other through the small struggles of daily life. She met my friends. I met hers. We talked about maybe moving in together someday, but without pressure, without deadlines. One evening, as we sat in my apartment watching a movie, Eva suddenly asked, "Do you still think about her?" I considered the question. Did I think about Charlotte? Sometimes. But they weren't painful memories anymore, just fact from my past, like remembering a job I used to have or a place I used to live. No, iensuaratunasli. I think about the future. Eva smiled and rested her head on my shoulder, and I felt content in a way I hadn't for a very long time. A week later, something happened that I didn't expect at all. Charlotte called me. Her voice trembled with anxiety, fear evident in every word. "David, I need help. I don't know who else to turn to." "What happened?" "Philip, he's tried to blame me for those financial schemes. Says I was an accomplice, that I carried money for him. I have a summons from the IRS." I was silent. Part of me wanted to say, you deserve it. But another part, the part that remembered the woman I'd once loved, the woman who'd laughed at my jokes and held my hand during movies, hesitated. Did you really carry money for him? I asked. Yes, but I didn't know it was illegal. He said they were just envelopes for clients, bonuses for good service. Charlotte, you need a lawyer. A good lawyer. I don't have money for a lawyer. She was almost crying, desperation evident. David, please, I know I have no right to ask, but I don't know what to do. I sighed. This woman had destroyed my life, betrayed my trust, made me question my own judgment. But she didn't deserve prison for someone else's crimes. Despite everything, I couldn't let her be destroyed by Philip's vindictiveness. I'll give you my lawyer's contact information, I said. Oliver's good at what he does. Tell him I referred you, and he'll give you a discount. I can't accept. Charlotte, I interrupted. Take this help. Not for me, not for us. For yourself. To close this chapter and start a new life. Consider it my final gift, closure for both of us. She thanked me through tears and hung up. Eva, who had heard everything, looked at me with curiosity rather than jealousy, which I appreciated. Why are you helping her? I shrugged, trying to articulate feelings I barely understood myself. Because holding on to anger is like holding burning coal. It only burns you. I don't forgive her betrayal, but I don't want her to suffer for something that truly wasn't her fault. Philip used her, just like he used everyone around him. She was stupid and greedy, but she wasn't criminal. The following months proved I'd made the right decision. Oliver helped Charlotte prove she'd been an unwitting courier, that Philip had manipulated her into participating in schemes she didn't understand. She received probation and community service instead of actual prison time. The judge, hearing the full story of how she'd been used, showed unexpected mercy. Philip, however, faced serious charges. His trial dragged on for months, his expensive lawyers pulling every trick they knew. Eventually, he was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. His wife took the children and moved to another state, changing their last name to distance them from the scandal. His fall from grace was complete and very public. As for me, I continued living. Work at the factory, my relationship with Eva growing stronger and more serious. We even started talking about the possibility of moving in together, maybe eventually getting married for real this time. One day in late spring, when Dallas was drowning in greenery after the long winter, I received a letter. From Charlotte, a proper letter on paper, the kind nobody sends anymore. She wrote that she was moving to another city, to Houston. She had a job offer there, a chance to start with a clean slate. She thanked me for my help, for being a better person than she could have hoped for after everything she'd done. I know you'll never forgive me, and I understand that, she wrote in careful handwriting. But I want you to know, meeting you, even how it all ended, changed me. I'm learning to be better. Not for you, not for anyone else. For myself. Thank you for that lesson, even though I paid the highest price for it. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. It was the last connection to a past I was finally closing forever. There was no anger anymore, no bitterness, just a quiet satisfaction that I'd handled everything with dignity. That same evening, Eva suggested we take a weekend trip to Austin. I agreed without hesitation. The future was waiting for me, and it looked much brighter than the past ever had. Sometimes, to find real happiness, you have to let go of what you thought was happiness. Sometimes revenge isn't destroying another person, but freeing yourself from the pain they caused. Sometimes the best revenge is living well, moving forward, refusing to let betrayal define you. I was free, and that was the best revenge of all. Thank you for watching this video. YouTube may no longer suggest my channel to you, so subscribe to it to receive new interesting stories. You will also help the channel grow and improve the quality of its content. The screen now displays a playlist with other interesting stories that you can listen to. You can also write in the comments what stories you would like to see on the channel.